The water's warm.
Bring it on, says Nancy Pelosi in the face of a revolt that's brewing within her own party. Pelosi issuing a warning to fellow Democrats: if you want that speaker's gavel, you'll have to come and take it. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ed Henry, in for Martha MacCallum. Democrats in a bit of disarray tonight. Senator Kamala Harris, one of the many Democrats eyeing a potential White House run, raising eyebrows on the Hill by comparing law enforcement agents at ICE to the KKK. While over in the House, Democrats bracing for a possible implosion over Pelosi's bid to reclaim that speakership. One senior House Democrat telling Fox it's, quote, going to get ugly. But Pelosi follows the mantra of never let them see you sweat.
I intend to win the speakership with Democratic votes. I happen to think that at this point, I'm the best person for that.
And though she heaped a little praise on the new Democratic blood that's flowing into the House,
they have the courage to run, the stamina to win, and they are here now in what is one of the most transformative new body of members of Congress.
Well, some of that new blood not quite sold on the old guard leading the party.
To be fair to my residents, I have to have a conversation with her before committing.
Under no circumstances would I vote for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker.
This, as a growing list of both new and sitting House Democrats are prepping a letter pledging not to support Pelosi's speaker bid. Our chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is live on Capitol Hill. He's been all over the story. And right now, the battle for the future of the Democratic Party is on. Good evening, Mike.
Ed, good evening to you. Some House Democrats are telling us they expect this leadership fight to get nasty. Fox News has confirmed at least 17 Democrats are participating in a letter saying they will not support Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. Some were just reelected. Others will be new to Congress. Pelosi noted 14 of the opponents are men, hinting at sexism.
I enjoy a tremendous amount of support from the women in our caucus, from the new members who are women in our caucus, and so I get the upside, I think, of being a woman. You'd have to ask them. If, in fact, there is any misogyny involved in it, it's their problem, not mine.
Then there's Ohio Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, who has openly talked about running against Pelosi. She would offer a new voice, African-American, has 10 years of experience in Congress, and is a woman. That could further divide House Democrats.
I didn't know Marcia Fudge was interested.
It's been floated that she's interested in running. What would you think about something like that?
Well, I think Marcia would be an excellent leader. I'm just not sure that that's accurate, but I don't know. But, you know, that's very interesting.
As House Democrats battle it out over their future leadership, a rising star of the party in the Senate and likely presidential candidate in 2020, California Senator Kamala Harris, caused major controversy by comparing Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, to the KKK.
Are you aware of the perception of many about how the power and the discretion at ICE is being used to enforce the laws? And do you see any parallels?
I do not see any parallels.
With a whole range of Democrats considering presidential runs, being their leaders here on Capitol Hill is certain to have its challenges. Ed?
Thanks, Mike. We'll get to that comparison of the KKK in a moment. But for now, here's Dave Bossie, the former Trump deputy campaign manager and a Fox News contributor, and author of the new book, Trump's Enemies. Ed Rendell, former DNC chair and former governor of Pennsylvania, is here as well. Ed, good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, I want to start with you. Seth Moulton, a Democratic lawmaker, just tweeted this in the last couple of moments. He says, Congresswoman Marcia Fudge of Ohio is the kind of new leader that we deserve in this party, and I hope she runs for Speaker. We need more women, including women of color, in congressional leadership. What's happening in the Democratic Party tonight?
Well, look, Democrats who ran for office were afraid that Nancy Pelosi was an albatross that would be hung around their neck. And it turns out she wasn't. Despite the Republicans' attempt to demonize Nancy Pelosi, we're going to win about 40 seats in the most recent election, 40 seats that were previously held by Republicans. Nancy Pelosi is the reason that most of those Democrats won, because she, by her leadership, and only by her leadership, got the ACA passed without any Republican votes.
But Ed, pardon me, if she did such a great job, why are a rising number of Democrats saying, no, we want a new face?
Well, I don't think, when you consider what the caucus numbers are, I don't think 17 is a rising number. And you're always going to have people who want change, and I understand the need for change. But Nancy Pelosi was a great speaker. She saved the country when she found the votes for TARP, for President Bush's TARP program, when the Republicans couldn't pass it. She saved the ACA. You ask Barack Obama, and he'll tell you there wouldn't be an ACA without Nancy Pelosi. And the ACA was the reason that most of our candidates won.
So let me bring in Dave Bossie. Dave, when the president tweeted a couple of days ago that, look, if the Democrats can't get her to 218 the votes to become speaker, we'll get Republicans to do it. That's because the president wants her to be speaker, doesn't he?
We desperately want Nancy Pelosi back. Unfortunately, the Democrats took the House. We would love to have, I think, see Nancy Pelosi be Speaker because she represents, and her negatives are so high across this country that it gives us an opportunity once again to juxtapose Democrat policies of open borders, sanctuary cities, destroying ICE, like Kamala Harris just talked about today, again, whether it's tax hikes, you name the liberal policy, they're going to be for it. And with Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, we're going to be able to say what Republicans stand for and really make a great case again for the president's reelect and taking back the House in 2020.
Ed, on that question of open borders, I want to play a little bit more of what Kamala Harris said today, and I want to give you a chance to respond. Listen to this.
Are you aware that there's a perception that ICE is administering its power in a way that is causing fear and intimidation, particularly among immigrants and specifically among immigrants coming from Mexico and Central America? Are you aware of that perception?
I do not see a parallel between the power and the authority that ICE has to do its job.
Ed, the context is that's Ron Vitello. He's the president's nominee. He's served his country for 30 years now in law enforcement. He is the nominee to be director of ICE. And I looked it up. And a couple of weeks ago, Ed, as a Democrat, you said publicly that the party was making a mistake by saying they should abolish ICE. And you said that some of these ideas are not based in reality and that could help the president be reelected in 2020. Why is Kamala Harris not listening to you and comparing ICE agents to the KKK?
Well, first of all, I don't know how many people listen to me anymore. But having said that, it makes no sense. Look, ICE should be reformed, and there are problems with ICE, and there's no question. And Senator Harris has identified some of those problems. But ICE also performs vital functions like keeping drug dealers from crossing our borders, keeping people who want to get young girls and turn them into sex slaves. ICE needs reform, but it doesn't need abolishment. If we got rid of ICE, we'd have to come up with an agency just like it. So it makes no sense.
Dave, when you look at the Democratic potential field, we're talking about maybe a couple of dozen different senators, House members and whatnot want to get in, whether it's Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren, who might have hurt herself with the DNA test, and all of that back and forth with the president. What about what Kamala Harris said today?
Oh, it's outrageous. Look, Ed is exactly right. We need an agency like ICE. To attack ICE is the equivalent of attacking every law enforcement man or woman across this great country. The men and women who put on the uniform every day and go out there to protect us from the bad guys. And that is what this is about. It's about law and order versus lawlessness. It is about supporting law enforcement against the open borders policies that these people support. So I think we need to support ICE. This president certainly supports ICE, and we need Republicans and Democrats to support ICE. And if Ed thinks there needs to be reforms in it, I think that let's talk about those small things around the edges, but let's not demonize an entire police force.
Ed, I've got less than 30 seconds, but let's put together what you had previously said that I noted about ICE and some Democrats saying it should be abolished, the Harris comments today, the talk about 85 different subpoenas. There may be things that Democrats want to investigate that might be fair. But do you think the Democrats may overplay their hand in the days ahead?
It's always a potential, and the Republicans did it during the Bill Clinton impeachment. Look, we need to show the country we can legislate and get things done. That's even more important than investigations. There are some, as you said, investigations that are probably appropriate, but let's get in there and try to solve the nation's problems. And even if we can't get the bills past the Senate, let's get a good bill.
Quick last word from Dave Bossie.
What we stand for.
Go ahead, Dave.
And overreach is going to be the watchword of this Congress. They are not going to be able to help themselves because their base demands radical action by this radical new group of congressmen and women who have come to Washington and are going to attack this president at every turn.
Dave Bossie, Ed Rendell, appreciate you both coming in.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, we've got a Fox News alert. Breaking right this moment in Florida. Did Brenda Snipes intentionally miss tonight's recount deadline because the new numbers favored Republican Rick Scott? Republican Matt Gaetz responds to the explosive new allegation made by the Scott campaign next. The election disaster in Florida just got a little worse, with Broward County missing the deadline to turn in their recount total by, yes, just 2 minutes. That means the new totals get thrown away. So what was the point of what they were doing for days? According to Rick Scott's campaign, that was not an accident. The Republican is claiming they did it on purpose because his numbers would have improved. Our correspondent Phil Keating has a story live from Riviera Beach, Florida. Good evening, Phil.
Good evening, Ed. The highly memorable 2018 Florida election machine recount is now over, and now the humans take over. In most races, it's already decided the margin of victory was large enough. However, in a few races statewide, including that U.S. Senate race between Governor Scott and Senator Bill Nelson, it is under 0.25%. That's the margin of difference. Therefore, humans will be in here tomorrow, 11 a.m. in Palm Beach County, to begin going over roughly 6,000 ballots, which were problematic and not counted because they either had undervotes or overvotes. Now, that machine recount actually showed Republican Rick Scott gaining in votes and his lead over the original results. Scott now leads Nelson by 0.15%. Hand counters will now go through all those problematic ballots, and in the also closely watched governor's race, the recount results stayed almost exactly the same, just one vote difference, with Republican former Congressman Ron DeSantis leading Tallahassee Mayor Andrew Gillum by 0.41%. That's high enough to avoid a hand count. This afternoon, the DeSantis campaign released this statement, quote, "Those returns remain clear and unambiguous, just as they were on election night and at every point throughout this process. I remain humbled by your support and the great honor the people of Florida have shown me as I prepare to serve as your next governor." While Broward County celebrated after midnight when it thought it had completed its last ballot recount, well, today election staffers uploaded their results to the state 2 minutes too late. At 3:02, they were due at 3 o'clock. So original numbers will be the ones made official. And in the words tonight of a not so happy staffer, quote, "I worked my ass off for nothing." Palm Beach County failed to make the recount deadline, period. And the supervisor of elections blames the machines.
Well, I will explain it to say that I believe strongly that it wasn't not a human effort, it was mechanical. And so we're required to present a report to the Secretary of State, and that's exactly what I'm going to report.
But because of that breakdown of the machines, Senator Nelson tonight suing for a hand recount of all ballots in Palm Beach County. Attorney Mark Elias with the Nelson campaign said this in a tweet: "We have sued Palm Beach County and the Florida Secretary of State to require a hand count of all ballots in the county due to systematic machine failure during the machine recount." Now, the hand count will now get fully underway here in Palm Beach, 11 a.m. tomorrow. Other counties around the state, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Results of the hand count are due now, Secretary of State, on Sunday. Ed.
Phil Keating working his reporter's notebook off for us tonight. Phil, thank you. Joining me now, Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, a Republican who has literally been trying to force his way into some of those offices in Broward County to get some answers. He joins us live tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming in.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ed.
I want to get to the Senate mess because it seems the biggest one tonight. But before I forget, is it time for the Democrat Andrew Gillum in the governor's race to concede? Because as Phil just reported, they're counting, they're recounting, and only one vote has changed, and he's down.
Yeah, absolutely. Governor-elect Ron DeSantis is going to do a great job for Florida. Andrew Gillum's continuation of this charade really is undignified. I think he ought to concede immediately. And you see with some of these instances, whether it's Stacey Abrams, Andrew Gillum, or maybe others, where they're trying to enhance their celebrity by not conceding. And that's not really good for democracy. We all ought to be willing to accept the results of the voters. And here that was clearly for Ron DeSantis.
All right, let's get to the Senate race. From what I understand, and you heard in Phil's reporting, that particularly in Broward County, it looks like Democrat Bill Nelson lost roughly 700 votes after their recounting. And so they're supposed to turn that in, and they missed the deadline by 2 minutes. Rick Scott, the Republican, his campaign, which you support, obviously, is saying tonight they did that on purpose because they don't want to admit that Bill Nelson is losing votes.
Well, this circumstance arises because there is a discrepancy in the number of votes that went through the unofficial count initially and then those which were counted by the recount. It's a discrepancy of over 2,000 ballots. And when you actually evaluate those, Rick Scott does rather well within that pool of ballots. And so he's understandably frustrated that some staff member has this report go in 2 minutes late and then he's unable to benefit from that. Ed, at the end of the day, I think that really Rick Scott's win is also outside the margin of fraud, but it demonstrates that challenge. And there's new reporting out of the Washington Post that Broward Supervisor of Elections official was saying that the reason that that discrepancy exists is because the ballot pool was polluted by ballots that were not supposed to be counted.
But Congressman, as you know, we've been lectured for days that we have to, quote unquote, count all the votes. Now we count the votes, and it looks like it's not helping the Democrat, so the paperwork's not turned in. Is it count all the votes?
It shows the hypocrisy.
Yeah,
it really shows the hypocrisy of Senator Nelson's argument. He is suing in a variety of other counties throughout the state, saying, oh, we have to count every vote under any circumstance. And now, as a result of a clerical error that neither Rick Scott nor the people who voted for him could control, potentially a universe of over 2,000 ballots, giving Rick Scott more than a 700 vote additional boost to his lead. I mean, that would not be democratic, but it's indicative of these broad problems we have with compliance with the law in Broward and Palm Beach counties.
Congressman, on the other hand, there's a Republican, as you know, former Congressman Joe Walsh, who has heard your comments saying that this is a dry run for Democrats to, quote unquote, steal the election from Donald Trump in 2020. And he is saying, wait a second, this is irresponsible and dangerous of you.
Yeah, Joe Walsh was the member of Congress who went on Sacha Baron Cohen's television show, looked directly in the camera and said toddlers should have firearms. So I probably won't take too much of his advice on what constitutes irresponsible rhetoric. I don't take my marching orders or my P's and Q's from somebody who doesn't have enough sense not to read inflammatory and dangerous material that's put in front of them.
I've got less than 30 seconds. How does this Senate battle end? Not just with who you think is going to win, but what's the reasonable timetable now? There's a hand recount, is that right?
Yeah, there'll be a hand recount. That takes a while with 8 million ballots to go through and count, but ultimately it ends with Rick Scott being sworn in as the senator. And then hopefully, Ed, we can actually work together, Republicans and Democrats, diagnose these problems, and then demand greater transparency along the way. The best antidote to fraud is transparency. And so if you force everybody to turn the cards face up earlier in the process, you don't have a circumstance where you got 80,000 ballots with a very dubious chain of custody.
Congressman Gates, appreciate you coming in tonight.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, what was really going on behind the scenes at Facebook during the whole fake news scandal and how the company tried to leverage power from friends in Washington. Finally learning what was really going on behind the scenes at Facebook during that whole fake news scandal and how the company, once promised nothing but transparency, became masters of, quote unquote, delaying, denying, and deflecting. That all according to a bombshell New York Times report, which Facebook is now going out of its way to try and discredit. Our correspondent Trace Gallagher is following the latest live from our West Coast newsroom. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Ed. The New York Times story on Facebook apparently took 5 months to put together, had 5 separate bylines, and came in at more than 5,000 words, going into great detail about how Facebook leaders knew very well in 2016 that Russia was using its platform to influence the election, but then resorted to what the Times calls delay, deny, and deflect, saying that after finding out its platform was being used to interfere with the election, Facebook leaders Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg tried to stall the evidence and later deny denied it was true. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg famously once called Russian meddling a, quote, pretty crazy idea. And later, Facebook reportedly deflected by hiring a conservative PR firm to blame other tech giants like Apple and Google. The Times goes on to say the PR firm even tried to get the media to report on financial ties between the enemies of Facebook and billionaire liberal donor George Soros. Today, Soros called for Facebook to initiate an independent internal investigation into its lobbying and public relations work. And the president of the Open Society Foundation, which is the principal conduit for Soros donations, wrote an open letter to Sheryl Sandberg saying, quote, "It's been disappointing to see how you have failed to monitor hate and misinformation on Facebook's platform. To now learn that you are active in promoting these distortions is beyond the pale." The hate Mr. Gaspard refers to is the New York Times accusation that Facebook tried to depict its critics as anti-Semitic. Both Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg are Jewish. So far, Facebook has not flat out denied the accusations, but Zuckerberg has called them unfair. And during a conference call today, he said this. Listen.
I've said many times before that we were too slow to spot Russian interference, too slow to understand it, and too slow to get on top of it. And we've certainly stumbled along the way. But to suggest that we weren't interested in knowing the truth, or that we wanted to hide what we knew, or that we tried to prevent investigations is simply untrue.
The Times says that while Facebook was battling enemies, it was also rallying supporters like New York Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer, who raised more money from Facebook employees than any other member of Congress. The article says, as the criticism of Facebook mounted over its handling of Russian meddling, Schumer tried to get the Senate Intel Committee to slow walk its investigation of Facebook. Senator Schumer has not yet issued a statement on the article. Ed.
All right, Trace, appreciate your report. Republicans may have lost control of the House, but what if we told you that might have been a good thing when it comes to building the wall? Breaking new details from a meeting at the White House today. That's next.
On day one, we will begin working on an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall.
President and Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell may finally have a path forward to carry out one.
I add emphasis on the word try to get it done. When the funding bill comes around, Republicans will effectively be daring Democrats in December to shut down the government over border wall funding. But remember, Republicans will still control both the House and the Senate. As we have seen before, this is a dangerous game. Republicans won 5.
Democrats and Republicans came to the $1.6 billion agreement, and we believe Democrats and Republicans should stick with their agreement and not let President Trump interfere. Every time he interferes, it gets bollocksed up.
At the White House today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, along with Senators Shelby and Thune, were there. Democrats were not. As you heard, they made their feelings clear yesterday. McConnell says he is optimistic about the funding. Shelby called the wall both the linchpin and the obstacle. Much of this will come down to timing. The first waves.
Can't call it anything but a stunt here. We don't know where the caravan, if it makes it north, is going to come. I think it could be handled by civilians that we have there in terms of Border Patrol and others. I don't know what I could tell them other than we shouldn't be doing this.
Joining me now is Brian Dean Wright. He's a former CIA operations officer, and he is also a Democrat. Good to see you.
Pleasure.
You were shaking your head here in the studio when Jeff Flake said that.
Yeah. Look, we have 2,000 people come across the border every day, right? Spanned a year, we got 600,000 folks. That is a serious problem. How do we address it? A wall, whether it be, fully, a literal building, a wall, great. But it has to be something. And what we are doing now clearly isn't working. So this idea that we're just engaging in stunts is silly. Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, said it was silly.
And said it was not a stunt. And in fact, we did this brand new Fox News voter analysis for the midterms. We rolled it out ahead of 2020. And there was something among many things that were interesting. Issues facing the country. This is another poll from Quinnipiac. Do you think illegals crossing the border is an important problem? 71% say yes, it's important. 26% say no. The Fox News voter analysis. Most important issue facing the country. Healthcare, 26%. That was good for Democrats, bad for Republicans. Immigration, 23%. Economy, 19%. you see guns in the environment. My point being, immigration is higher on that list than Democrats want to admit that maybe the president's right.
That's right. And I think what you will end up seeing in the coming months as the caravans continue to flow, not just this one that's already at the border, but as more come, and we see these numbers go up from 1,000, 2,000 plus, which, because there is a new president in Mexico, that is looking more and more likely to happen. The American people are going to see these numbers, going to see these people hitting. We fix our border. It has to be.
So we were challenging the Democrats with what I just asked you. What about challenging the Republicans, which is that now you get the president huddling with Mitch McConnell saying maybe we can get this done in a lame duck session in terms of funding for the wall. Where were the House and Senate Republicans who ran those chambers for the last 2 years?
Yeah. So what we saw is a great division within the Republican Party around this. You know, you had a lot of great folks like Will Hurd in Texas put forward very thoughtful pieces of legislation to resolve this. But there are folks within the Freedom Caucus who said, absolutely not, we're not going to deal on this. So obviously Speaker Ryan, you know, he struggled to resolve that challenge in his own party. So it's true. The GOP is at this place in part because they couldn't figure it out. So a tough issue, but the American people are going to demand some sort of result very soon as the border
In fact, to your point about the American people, some Republicans are saying they think that's why Republicans lost the House, is they didn't deliver on health care and fully repealing and replacing and building the wall.
I think that's a fair point.
All right. We appreciate it. Brian Dean Wright, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure, sir.
Coming up, the HUD Secretary, Dr. Ben Carson, could soon see his name stripped off a Detroit school. That's where he grew up. The school board members don't like the president. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Charlie LaDuff on whether or not this should really be Detroit's top priority. Story, the Detroit School Board now considering stripping the name of HUD Secretary Dr. Ben Carson off of a local school over his ties, yes, to the president. The Benjamin Carson High School of Science and Medicine could eventually be renamed after the late Aretha Franklin because, according to one school board member, having Carson's name on the building was, quote, synonymous with having Trump's name on our school in blackface. Joining me now, Charlie LaDuff. He is the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has covered the Detroit area extensively. He's author of the new book, be careful with this, Blank Show. The country's collapsing and the ratings are great. Good to see you, Charlie.
Good to be here, man.
So my folks here at the show put together an incredible packet about really awful statistics, frankly, about the drinking water in Detroit schools being despicable, about some of the kids at the Ben Carson School. 8% of the students at the School of Science and Medicine are proficient in math. 8%. This is a national crisis, and we're talking about renaming the school instead of teaching these kids.
Yeah, it's a matter of priorities, isn't it? I mean, hello, America. Hello, St. Louis. This is just another one of those things, I think, that just frustrates us all. Because, again, you're going to rename it because you don't like the guy. But that's the school board president. But here's the funny thing. The school board's decided that they're going to rename a couple. Well, they're going to go through a process. It hasn't been done. But they're going to rename schools that don't reflect the community or its history. So why in the world are they also considering renaming Frederick Douglass Academy? You get what I'm saying? Over half the schools have lead poisoning, so they have to shut off the fountains. 8% proficiency in math. 30% proficiency in reading, and this is what we're doing, and this is why New York's calling.
I want to get back to the reading and math, which seems the most important part of this discussion, but I can't let pass what you just said. So there's another school named after the great Frederick Douglass, and there are people who want to take his name off of school. Why in the world would they do that?
They want to, I don't know. We're going to have to let it shake out. Again, it's a process. It goes to another board, and we vote on it. But let's get down to the real issues in the city and the country. The kids aren't learning, and just blaming their parents isn't going to work because you know what? I came from a house that wasn't exactly, stable all the time. But when you go to school, when the kid leaves, his boat's supposed to have risen a little bit. Whether his home's messed up or not, he's supposed to be able to do math at better than 8%. And we're sitting here arguing over the name of the school in Ben Carson.
It's criminal, really.
It's ridiculous.
But I don't want to just sit here and bash Detroit. You're there,
it's awesome.
And you love the city. And I was there for a Detroit Tigers game a couple years ago, and the comeback is real. So I don't want to just focus on the negative. Talk a little bit about the comeback for the city and how this must make it more frustrating for you, because on one hand, the city's coming back, and then on the other hand, you have this nonsense going on.
Well, look, I hate to be a reporter about it. I decided to move my family here. I'm not leaving. We have a lot of building going on. We have a lot of nightlife again, right? But the city continues to lose population out in the neighborhoods. So we're creating a core, but all of this stuff where Frederick Douglass is, where Ben Carson is, are struggling beyond belief. In fact, Moody's just gave Detroit's borrowing status a junk rating. So we're coming back, but like a lot of America, you wonder, are we on a cliff? Is this for real? Is it a bubble? So Tigers are great. Steak at night is great. Craft beer is great. But education. But listen, a firefighter just died on the job, right? And his wife and kids will not have health insurance because of the settlement and the bankruptcy. They're thrown off of it. So I don't fully buy into it. I want results. I want numbers. I want police. I want them to be respected. And I want children to do well.
I only have 1 minute left, but at that Ben Carson school, I mentioned 8% of the students proficient in math, 20% proficient in reading. So a better number, but still awful. The president carried the state of Michigan. The president in the campaign said that he wanted to help cities like Chicago and Detroit. What's your message to him tonight?
Well, here's my message to all y'all, all the Democrats and Republicans. The Rust Belt went red. It's a national embarrassment for the Democrats. You're all going to be here in droves with your billions of dollars. Pay attention to our children and their futures. You deliver that, you convince people, you'll win here.
Charlie LaDuff with a very personal to him message, but also a very powerful message for all of us tonight. Charlie, appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me, brother.
All right. And after an attempted assassination, we've watched Congressman Steve Scalise's heroic road to recovery. But there's still a lot we don't know, like the unexpected friends he's made along the way. He shares his untold story with Martha. That's next. Every night, how politics seems to have gotten a bit more divisive, and no one knows this better than Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. He was shot over a year ago on a baseball field, of course, practicing for a game that was intended to unify both parties. We've watched almost every step of the congressman's road to recovery, but there's still a lot we don't know about him. Martha sat down with the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise, author of Back in the Game, where he shares his untold story.
That story people don't know or don't understand?
Well, you know, for 3.5 months I was in the hospital, and especially those first few weeks, I was in and out of consciousness and surgeries and, you know, truly battling for my life. And I think in the first few days, people didn't know just how serious it was, and, you know, that I had literally come at least twice that first day to not making it, and all the miracles that happened along the way. And, you know, and just how both myself but so many other people that were out on that ball field could have easily could have been a really bad ending.
You have a lot of people in this country who feel like these are extraordinary times and that they have to go to the most extreme measures to make their point, to resist, to push back.
That's not an acceptable answer in politics. And, you know, look, we've had even tougher times in our nation's history. I mean, I work in a living history museum in the United States Capitol, and I have a room in one of my offices that Abraham Lincoln used to spend time in. And I renamed it the Lincoln Room just because I wanted people to sense that history that we're all a part of, but that we also ought to reflect back on and say, you know, as tough as times are today, they had a lot tougher times then. You know, I mean, Abraham Lincoln gave his life for the cause of freeing people from slavery.
And you think about what happened to Abraham Lincoln, and that man wanted to do that to you that day on the baseball field.
He didn't. Thank God he didn't. Thanks through the grace of God and through a lot of heroic acts, and I talk about that in the book. I mean, of course, David Bailey and Crystal Griner, the two Capitol police officers who were there with me, who risked their lives. Both were shot
during the shootout and kept going at it until they took the shooter down, the Alexandria police. And again, it's not just me. There was over a dozen other members of Congress and some staffers and volunteers that were there, too, that would have all been executed had it not been for those little miracles, as we refer to them, and the heroes, too, that we saw that day.
You made a friend that you didn't expect to make through this whole process, somebody that you were a big fan of, who was really good to you, Mono.
Oh, my gosh. There were so many of those interesting stories.
Right.
Look, and I was a high school student. U2 was probably my favorite band.